Welcome to Culture Meets Crypto, a podcast by Signum Growth that dives into the intersection of gaming, art, music, and crypto. Each week, Angela and Evan speak with iconic thinkers, thought leaders, and CEOs about the many new online economies and business models which are bubbling up in the metaverse.
Welcome back, everyone, to Culture Meets Crypto. I'm very excited today to have Kathleen and Arthur Breitman, good friends and iconic thinkers and pioneers in the crypto space. Our podcast is called Culture Meets Crypto, and we will be talking about a lot of cultural topics like art later, but I just will mention straight up front that I love the quote that I saw. It was referencing Art Basel. And it said, last year was a crypto conference. This year, only Tezos remained. So we're definitely going to get into the art topic. And just to cover our goal here, it's really to have people on the show who are into kind of world changing on a longer term basis. Kathleen, you and I met through the gaming world when you founded Coase. And you and Arthur have really always impressed me in terms of people who are building something with true staying power. So I did listen to you recently, Arthur, as I mentioned on a podcast, and I loved it when you said, even if you could play the hype game, you wouldn't kind of know how to play it. You're not a hype man. So I would love for you both to go into really kind of the bricks that laid the foundation that led you to build Tezos.
Boy, that's a very generous introduction and a nice preamble, Angie. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Arthur, I have my account of things. Would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the main brick is governance. That's really the basis of it all. It's looking at innovation essentially in the blockchain space and seeing two different paths, and I didn't like either one. So one path was to basically block out innovation and decide that the only way to be decentralized is to have your protocol set in stone and to basically never evolve. Or the other one was to embrace, a blurry line where protocols are basically run like companies, raise VC funding, and talk about developers changing the protocol. I didn't like either way. So how could we be dynamic, upgrade the ability to take in scientific innovation, technical innovation, and at the same time remain decentralized? And for me, there was on-chain governance, and that's really the heart of the project. But I would also say it wouldn't have been interesting to talk about on-chain governance if it weren't for those innovations. And the innovations in question that I was quite interested in 2014, where smart contract technology, privacy-preserving transaction, proof of stake, all of these ideas that were coming to the front, and where Tezos has been a pioneer.
I think what really happened was Arthur read a bunch of bad arguments for Bitcoin on the internet and got very frustrated. And Tezos
No. That's how I got into Bitcoin. And then I read a lot of bad arguments against proof of stake. And that's how I got into proof of stake.
Very well. But
there's a saying that if you want like the answer to a good answer to something, on the best way to do it on the internet is not to ask, is to say something wrong about it and have people correct you.
I would add that, you have to kind of put things in the context of 2013 and 2014 if you're going to talk about the Tezos origin story, because it very much is like, it reflects a certain path where like people were beginning to basically launch new like altcoins, right? Every time that a new innovation came to the fore. And now, what Arthur makes reference to is there's also very highly centralized projects which can operate really quickly, but there's a cost to that, and that's at the expense of decentralization, arguably.
I mean, that's a topic that let's just dive into decentralization. I mean, we've seen some really egregious acts, I think, recently. I mean, on Solend, there was a, emergency governance proposal, and a DAO was created with 24 hours to go to the vote. 98% of the yes vote came from one unidentified whale wallet. Users were given 6 hours to vote, and yet the site was down for 3 hours. That is, in my mind, not where we are going in this space. And so I would just love for you to comment on decentralization as a leader in this space.
I think that the markets, the market also caters to demand, and people have not been demanding decentralization, right? So they've been using these platforms. It's because a lot of users, not really users, they're incentivized They don't really have a need to use the platform. They are being paid to use the platform. That's what happens in many cases. However, the fact about decentralization is that it's like an insurance policy. It's not, it doesn't give you something directly. You don't realize that you want decentralization until you sorely need it. You don't realize you want decentralization until you realize that, yes, you've lent your assets in a centralized protocol or to a centralized issue as opposed to a truly decentralized system. And that, it's those stressful moments that these things actually get tested and you can see the difference. So I would say that consumers learn, but they learn over a longer time scale because they learn over the time scale of crisis, as opposed to having immediate feedback that, oh no, I don't want to use it, it's not decentralized. So that takes time.
I mean, the episode that you just mentioned is I remember in 2016 people talking about that as like a worst case scenario for having governance by token holders, was being basically like disenfranchising people and taking their funds or messing around with things just to punish one person. So it's kind of funny that this actually did happen, and doesn't seem to have affected the reputation as much. To Arthur's point, I think that's because there's not that much of a market for this.
A lot of the industry is not really serving a need. A lot of the industry is people creating tokens, creating narratives around token, selling the token, and then starting over with a new project. And sadly, a lot of that has been driven by institutional investors.
Mm-hmm. We had William Intrican on the show, and it was really enlightening because he was the lead author of the ERC 721 standard, and he only recently started buying NFTs because he felt that the first wave, he talked about these 3 bicycles going at different speeds, and he thought the first wave could be a lot of speculation and a lot of kind of average people getting hurt by the speculation. I'd love to hear if there is, like, if we are embarking on phase 2, what you think phase 2 might look like.
Well, I think the ethos that's been cultivated in the Tezos ecosystem is unique to the NFT craze in particular. It seems to be much more grassroots than some of the other ecosystems. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Arthur, but I think it's something that we're both pretty proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. The description I like that it feels like Greenwich Village in the 70s, in the 60s,
or Paris in the 1910s, if you want to go to.
Yes, La Belle Époque. But yes, that's definitely a feeling. It's a community of builder, and of course there's some speculation on Tezos, but I don't think it's a driving force for much of the NFT market. It's largely dominated by artwork and one-of-one pieces. So a collector that goes and buy an amazing photograph from a collector who comes in and buys an amazing photograph for 500 Tez is not someone who's speculating that they're going to flip it tomorrow, whereas someone who buys the ends derivative of a named project, which is completely copied on something that was already an original and then copied on something that was original, that is obviously much more driven by speculation.
The line story about fungibility when you get millions of the same collection as well.
Oh yes, yeah, million items. They're all slightly different. Here's a floor price, and here's how you can put a bid on the entire collection. And I'll give you packages of 3 random ones in the collection. Yeah.
Redefining fungibility.
Not fungibility becomes a pretext. This is not to throw the stone at LZ. Certainly, it's to throw the stone at the very, very unoriginal clones of this.
Meaning the unoriginal clones of say, so there's the 10,001 that actually is popular, and then the clones of that. Is that what you mean?
I think the Bored Apes the Bored Apes actually have achieve some cultural relevance, and there's something around it. I personally think it's overhyped, but there's a little there. But then when you're talking about the top collection on Magic Eden, which is a Primates, there is no there. It's just what if we did exactly the same thing, but it looked polygonal instead of looking, flat 2D drawings. That is not particularly inspired. And so as a result, a lot of the volume on the Tezos market has been sustained or even up through the bear market, whereas obviously the volume in all of the PFP trading has been crashing on other platforms.
I want to get into the Tezos art platforms because I love them. I'm an avid collector on them. But I also want to touch back on your point about kind of a lack of desire for decentralization. Because there's one example on Tezos where users really did ask for decentralization, and that was the Hicketnunk saga. So for the listeners, an NFT platform launched on Tezos, I think in March of 2021. A bunch of organic art collectors and artists came to the platform. Generative artists were coding artworks, people were collecting, and then the platform shut down. And very quickly, the developer who shut down the platform, shut down the website. I think he was still in power of the contracts. Correct me if I'm wrong. But very quickly, the community put up 20 new front ends, and collectors were able to begin accessing their NFTs, moving their NFTs around. So I'd love to hear your perspective of that, of watching that unfold.
Obviously it was stressful, and while I respect the developer's decision to want to pull the plug, it's his website, he can pull the plug. I do think it's interesting that we have a really good example to point to say, like, how is this different from traditional website? How is this really decentralized? And usually before that, you could make up a story. You could say, well, if you use a commercial website, maybe they will change the terms and condition, and they will do this and they will do that. And you can conjure a hypothetical example. But here you don't have to do a hypothesis because it happened. The reason the site was able to be up in just a couple hours is because all the code was open source. And with an open source license, all the NFTs were on a chain, and all the media assets were on IPFS. So as a result, you could actually run a mirror. That's a true story of decentralization. It was not controlled by a single person. It was a product of the community, and it survived. And it's a good test. If you want to see if your product is decentralized, if you yank the website, or if you yank, like a key person, is there still a thriving community? Is there still a thriving project or not? I think that's an important test of decentralization.
It didn't really halt any development of art on Tezos too. Like, it didn't stunt that community in the slightest.
No.
And actually, like, people seem to take more ownership of the platform after, right, Arthur?
Yeah. So I mean, this kind of shocks can actually trigger, the Cambrian explosion analogy is so overdone, and yet it's in my head now because you have a shock to the system, and then you have all the species that bloom. It's cliched, it's overdone, but it's true. Like, there were a lot of platforms that launched after this. We had Object.com, Theia, Versum, and Fixash. So there's many. There's a bloom, and there was a diaspora out of it that has been insanely productive and creative on a Tezos network.
There's also been like a bit of a selection bias because, like, you do have a lot of generative artists who know how to program in the first place, and so you wind up with websites that spring up from people who know how to program anyhow, and it doesn't have to be like subsidized to the kids by VCs for people to use. So there's a little bit of that going on too.
Yeah, Richard Kim is one of our good friends at Galaxy, and I have a quote here that he used to describe Hicketnunk, and he said, "Tezos is an ideal sandbox around which to develop one's own taste without regard to NFT influencers or quote, expert opinion, whereas on Ethereum, you focus on the things that are trades, not better art." So I thought that really encapsulated it, and I'd love to hear kind of how you got to that organic state. We've seen Marina Abramovic, we've seen a lot of artists and galleries pop up. Can you talk about that, Kathleen, in terms of how that's developed?
The people who've been most happy with the platform, and I think the people who are attracted to it, who I think Arthur and me personally take an interest in courting, whether it's making sure that they meet the right resources, or whether it's trying to establish closer ties to them as creators, are the people who just see this for what it is, which is an experimental technology that's going on the vanguard of a unique way to address digital assets. And I think the tell with a lot of the bigger projects that have received a lot of funding over the last, I would say, 2 years or so, is that it's all about getting VC-like returns into platforms that look a lot like a Sotheby's that went on the internet. And I think what's cool about Tezos is that, like, you do see a lot of experimentation with gaming, with video games, with comic books, and with these types of generative art. that you don't see elsewhere, because I don't want to say the stakes are low by any account, but it is a much better place to I think experiment as a culture and as an ethos.
I guess I was surprised to see Marina Abramovich, because she's a performance artist, and if anything, kind of the antithesis of this fully digital, immersive art space. How did that come about?
Well, I'm not privy to why she chose Tezos, but I did listen to one of her interviews about Web3, and a point that she made, which I thought was extremely insightful, was like when she started doing sort of performance art, people said, "Oh, that's not art because X, Y, Z." And she's like, "Well, you know what? I've been hearing this about NFTs, and that piqued my interest." And I think that's pretty funny and also like pretty insightful, right? Like if you kind of live through the skepticism, I think it either makes you very callous to other people doing it to other folks, or kind of emboldens you to like take an interest in people. And I'm happy that she kept an open mind, even though she achieved a lot of success and has been very pioneering and very famous in the in sort of the performance art space. I don't know, Arthur, do you have more color to add to the Abramovich bit?
Maybe, but I want to rebound on what you said, because it's something that struck me. Like I've heard people say like, "Oh, NFTs, this thing is not art," and I'm like, don't you have deja vu? Like it's almost a cliche that every single time there's like a new wave of artists, people say it's not art. Like you should have a little bit of, it's like, wait a second, am I wrong? No, it's the kids who are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Pets Archive Twitter account. It's come to life. Yeah, no, it's pretty funny. So good on her for like not being, I guess, shut off by like her enormous amount of success in one area, and being, in fact quite open-minded, and that's like a good godmother mentality.
I would say she knows what it's like to be in the avant-garde. So yeah, that's
yeah, it's super interesting. And what about these galleries that are popping up? Are these things that the Tezos Foundation is organized? Are these popping up kind of in a decentralized way? How are these Tezos galleries coming about?
It's the most random thing. There's an office. Trilitech is a London hub. Was an office in London, and I was wondering what was happening in the building next door, and it turns out it's an NFT gallery. That was just completely random. So I've seen those pop up, and I've seen those NFTs in those galleries. But no, it's not something we've the Tezos Foundation has had any, as far as I know, any direct involvement in. I just think Tezos is probably in terms in the size of the artistic community only second to Ethereum in the NFT art space. So it's natural that we're going to see those galleries with a lot of Tezos pieces.
Yeah, especially in a recession now that no one can afford to mint on Ethereum.
It's really interesting. It's very powerful when artists start talking to each other, and we talked about this back when we had we've crossed paths so many times, but we connected to Tezos built music platform, and musicians were saying at that time that they wouldn't get involved in NFTs on Ethereum because of the energy usage. Is that something, can you just talk about that and why that's appealing to artists?
I think it was a catalyst initially. I don't think it's a main appeal of it's certainly not today of the Tezos blockchain. But one of the catalysts that led a lot of artists to start minting on Tezos were the fact that it had low fees. It was decentralized, so I don't think they wanted to go on a chain that's owned by a few venture capitalists. So it was decentralized, it had low fees, and it didn't have the environmental impact that Ethereum can have through the mining. That was definitely a big part of the impetus in Q1, Q2 of 2021. I think by now it's more about the freedom of experimentation, the size of the community, the collectors, the artists, the tools, the different platforms that are in place. It's obviously an important part to have this low energy cost. But I don't think it's the main driver anymore.
Yeah, I think other projects have tried to differentiate themselves in the sort of clean the clean moniker. So that's a bit more saturated. I think it seems to be more about governance and decentralization and like kind of, for what the kids say, a vibe.
When you started Tezos, this is for both of you, of course. Which communities did you think would kind of flock to the platform first? Did you think that it would be artist communities that kind of would bring more users in, or do you think it would be the tech side, finance people?
That's a good question. When I really first started Twizzlers, I was very focused on the cryptocurrency store of value aspect. I thought that smart contracts are interesting, so that you could program escrow and some payments around that. But it was very much around this use case. And then it evolved a bit in our thinking. So it was worked as a cryptocurrency first that had smart contract capabilities as opposed to an application platform. I think that's a pivot that happened a bit later because it became clear that there was a strong demand for people to build applications. And one of the first use cases that outside of cryptocurrency and money that Cassie and I thought about around 2018 was gaming and NFT. NFT for games seemed to be a standout, and I still think it's something that holds tremendous appeal as an application on blockchains.
I'm really excited to get into gaming. That's how Kathleen and I met through Coast, and it'd be great to just hear about your entry into the space in gaming, and then we can go on from there because you guys have been pretty active there.
Yeah, I think just to riff on what Arthur said, we were approached pretty early by a number of different art folks. I mean, people have been having the idea of like a colored token or a watermark token with some sort of like art on it for quite some time. Our friend Kevin Bosch is one of the pioneers of that. It just seems as though it was a little bit of a phenomenon that took hold during COVID and the pandemic and people being very online all the time. So I think it was, the technology was definitely there, but like we just didn't know if there would ever be like a cultural call to arms around it. So it's nice to see that happen because that is something that we had observed and tried to ideate about. I think like in 2018, right, dear, when we were first in London.
Actually, now that I think about it, very early on, I think like maybe 2014, I had some books on Kindles, and I was thinking like, oh, I wish you could still have an autograph from the author on a digital book, but for it to be meaningful, it would have to be something on a blockchain. So that was, I think, my first NFT thought. And the other thing, which is interesting, one of the first artists that moved to the Tezos platform is a generative artist named Mario Klingemann, and I was a fan of Mario from before any of that. Because I was heavily interested in deep learning, generative adversarial network, and I started seeing his arts. He'd done a residency at Google, and I was like, wait a second, this guy is, he's a great artist, but on top of that, he has some really deep knowledge about this very, very arcane and advanced piece of technology. So I was super impressed, and I tried to collect his work early on, but it was all digital. So I did wonder, how do you collect the art from an artist that's all digital, where it's all in the AI realm? It made me think of this. And so I'm super thrilled that he led a lot of artists on a Tezos blockchain.
Because we own a Mario Klingemann, and in fact, I'm looking at one right now.
We do own a physical Mario Klingemann, yes.
Well, like dinosaurs that we are. But yeah, no. So I guess the idea of like kind of using cryptocurrencies or blockchain technology on in a game like is also pretty self-evident if you think about the lofty promises that people make about how cryptocurrencies can transform capital markets and things like this. Well, games already have like entire economies that are fully digitized. And so in theory, like the efficiencies that we, could gain from using this quote unquote in the real world, we could also benefit from in any sort of digital, digital economy or digital environment. And, we are used by, some of the folks at CPP Games, which is like one of the most robust like MMORPGs, EVE Online. So, I don't think it's surprising that there's a little bit of natural symbiosis between the two. And if you listen to Hilmar, who's the CEO of CCP Games, speak, he and I think Arthur and me kind of sound similar in interviews because he describes himself as the janitor. He's just there to make sure that the community is in a good spot. And I think that's a very similar attitude to what we take in terms of decentralization and cultivating a positive environment.
Yeah, it really is interesting because that was really the impetus for starting Signum. This idea that people have been buying, selling, trading digital assets and games for decades, and wanting to own them, and going so far as to buy and sell them outside of the game publisher. So we felt that NFTs could solve a problem, and blockchain could solve a problem that was already kind of happening. And I guess trading cards also lend themselves to this. How has the How has that evolved? And then can you also talk about the Ubisoft agreement that you have? Because it feels like you started with the trading card idea, and then it's really expanded from there.
Well, I think trading cards are a more natural fit for using like in-game assets and trading them, because there's just sort of a nice analog mapping to it. Whereas like, in-game items for MMORPGs, like, I mean, to run an MMORPG, you basically have to be running a movie studio. And so it's not exactly as easily replicable as sort of an open source gaming engine, which is, in effect, like what Magic the Gathering has. And the reason that there's so many different permutations of the game is because there's all this experimentation that's not just abetted, but encouraged by our good friends at Wizards on the Coast, for example.
It's in the name, it's a trading card game. Like the trading is part of the playing. That's what you're supposed to do. Like you play the cards and then you get with your friends and then you trade your cards with them because you build your deck. That's an integral part of what makes it fun. And that's a part that completely disappeared when this game actually came online. So there's a natural fit. This is a much better fit than, you'll own your sword in the game as an NFT. Yeah. Great. And then what? Right. Maybe someone else will be in a different universe where somehow this sword will make sense. The sword example, I always find to be one of the weakest pitch for NFTs in or crypto and games.
Yeah, that's one of our lines. The sword example doesn't work.
That's also one of the reasons that Arthur and I think blow a big raspberry whenever we hear about someone's new metaverse. That's going to be the best thing ever, if only you just buy these tokens for it. Yes. Eventually everyone else is going to come no, stop that. You're making us all look terrible. I think there's to quote you, Angie, apples and popcorn with some of these gaming applications. Some of them just don't map at all to their analogs or the tensions that you'd see in the games as they exist today.
I think we'll see artificial scarcity in virtual worlds because it makes the things more fun. Whether it's like unique items made by artists, this type of thing could have some value. But the general idea is saying like, here's some land, there's a limited supply, and if you buy it now because maybe one day it'll become very, very big and it will be very expensive for you to be there. I don't buy because it's just like the scarcity is too artificially high in this respect. It's kind of like, yes, there was a land rush to domain names, but it's funny because today all the Web3 people are using .xyz domain names, which are actually very, very cheap, and there's an endless supply of domain names and TLDs. And yes, there's values in having the .com, but at the end of the day, there's a ceiling, because as soon as you try to extract too much value from this type of property, new digital property is being created.
Yeah, and I think it's also quite telling that a lot of the people who've kind of bought into this, it's so scarce, you better get in and pay me $20 million or whatever, have been pretty unsophisticated retail brand names. So it's I think a little bit telling there, who's bought into this and who hasn't, frankly.
Yeah, we were just talking, Evan and I were just talking right before we started recording the show about Sandbox and the price. I think prices are down 80% or something like that this quarter, and it's just, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's when things get just completely crazy. I mean, when it makes no sense. Yeah.
There's something to be said for trying to cultivate a community early on and kind of getting everyone online in the same way. And I just think it's more important to have a fun game that people enjoy and then think through some of the issues around scarcity and trading, a little bit further down but that's just kind of the way I perceive it. But Arthur, do you have a different opinion?
No, I agree. And sometimes I would say that the speculation comes whether you want it or not. It can be difficult to manage if you're building a product which has a trading component.
I'd love to switch to branding and brand deals, because it seems like I've seen Tezos, kind of branding around Formula One, McLaren, Man United. I mean, there's a lot there that I think could bring in kind of the general population. Is that really the goal, or is it more to have these properties, building on Tezos? How would you describe those branding?
It's so the general idea is a multi-pronged approach. So it does several things. One is that there's just general like brand awareness, people being aware of Tezos, having seen the Tezos logo around, knowing what it is, being familiar with it, as opposed to something they never heard of. That's one thing, that's baseline. The other thing is that the assets that are created by partners or teams like this are assets which are traded on the Tezos network, and as a result, they bring their own fan base. So the fans who want to collect these NFTs do so. They open a Tezos wallet, and once they have a Tezos wallet, they can become active users on the Tezos network. So having more users on the Tezos network also makes it more attractive for people to build application on Tezos network, because now they can target these users. And if you look at a franchise like Manchester United, which is a franchise, they also do football, but they're a huge franchise with fans in the billions. It's just numbers that are so in excess of the active user base of any single DApp. Obviously, the challenge is conversion, right? You have a small fraction of these users are going to convert into full-time Tezos users, but even a small amount of conversion, if you can give compelling applications on your blockchain across their other centers of interest, which could be around sports, or which could be around music, or many different options, that I think you can create a base of users. It's also a way to drive middleware integration. So a lot of the I would say a lot of the adoption work that I think about is making sure that Tezos is available for every middleware provider, whether you're a wallet or a library or a custodian, some form of service provider, that's to ensure that you have a support for Tezos. And sometimes these use cases can be compelling arguments to drive integration in the services. So that's a broad idea. I think it's still early for a lot of sport brands in terms of understanding the value that the NFTs can bring. Sometimes I think of it in terms of like, oh, this is a partnership. So, you're getting a partnership, and sure, you're going to do some NFTs, but it's about partnerships. Others are going to see it more in the sense of like, actually, you want to connect with your fans. So we've had partnerships with esports team. And I think it's perhaps because of the digital elements, the esports team were the fastest at jumping on the opportunity in terms of building universes, building connections with their fans. Building some things. We have Blockborn, for example, out of Misfits, which is a sports team who's building a launchpad for game developers on Tezos. There's a fan experience being built by Team Vitality. So this is a lot more around engaging with the fan, which is I think what probably the most promising use case of NFT in this context, as opposed to mere collectibles.
Back in 2018, when we started the company, I predicted that esports would be the first adopters. Of course, I was totally wrong on that, but I saw the real, they have a challenge business model, and this could provide, kind of branding, new revenue stream, and also a way to kind of leapfrog a lot of traditional game publishers. So that's great to hear that you have those, that you've had that adoption in the esports world, because I think there's huge opportunity there. How does the Tezos Foundation think about the treasury and how it's deployed?
Well, we look at the treasury as an endowment that the foundation has. So the foundation's mission is to promote technology and research and adoption around the Tezos protocol. It's a nonprofit. It has some sources of revenue, but by and large, but they're minor by and large compared to the treasury. And the goal of the treasury is to ensure that we can first of all, we want to be able to do this over the long term. So to provide this support to the Tezos community and to different actors in the Tezos ecosystem. Tezos can only exist via its community, right? The network absolutely doesn't make sense if it's just controlled by one party. So what we try to do is empower people in the community, in the ecosystem, to be a part of Tezos and to grow the network.
I would argue, in fact, the Tezos community is much more powerful than the Tezos Foundation, given.
Right.
Yeah, look, Tezos Foundation did a lot of things in 2021, and I would say nothing was as impactful as the creation of Hic et Nunc for the Tezos network. Like by and large, if you look at impact, it's all dominated by Hic et Nunc and all the art communities that came on Tezos. That has driven Tezos far more than anything Tezos Foundation has done. It also happens it does happen on a bed of things that have happened. For example, this foundation did finance core development, and the core development helped kept the fee low on the blockchain when this deployment was happening. So there's an interplay.
It's also the case that one thing I receive a lot of compliments on is the tooling around the Tezos ecosystem, which is a function of like different grants that have been deployed and things like this. So as much as anything else. So I guess to Arthur's point, like one kind of gets the other, but what actually has led to a lot of the use of the network hasn't been like the foundation trying to subsidize people friends. It's been a lot more organic.
I was just thinking about this idea of Tezos and what comes to mind, and definitely NFTs, art, and maybe that's because of our own bias of being entrenched in these markets. But I don't really think about DeFi, and I wondered if that is happenstance, just the way the community kind of fell, or if you have a view on DeFi.
Yeah, I have a few views on DeFi. So the first thing is that Kessin calls it Ouroboros finance. Yeah, the point of finance is that you should be financing something, right? If you're not financing anything, what's your point to exist? There is a point to do so. The real thing that DeFi is financing is I hold a censorship-resistant store of value, and I would like a loan against it. That's one of the original DeFi use case. But if you look by volume, a lot of DeFi has been mostly used to do more DeFi, which is fine. You have some financial innovation that help the finance, but at the end of the day, there needs to be, and then it can't just be a circle, right? You need to go somewhere. You need to finance actual projects, not just other finance projects. And
the Sound of Music, nothing.
The what?
I said, to quote The Sound of Music, nothing comes from nothing.
Yes.
I love Kathleen's one-liners, by the way. I have to let some of those get through. Sorry, go ahead.
So I think what's interesting is we've had a bunch of STOs in 2019, but they still continued on the Tezos network. I think there's a few billions of STOs on Tezos, which is not often talked about, but it's still significant. Also a security token offering. It's basically you have this park of hotels, you tokenize it and put it on a blockchain. There's some value for issuers. It lowers costs for issuers. There's some value for holders. It makes it easier to transfer their shares, and you can interplay with a few exchanges that exist that will plug into those tokens. However, I think most of the value from this is still to be unlocked. And that comes when you use some of these on-chain primitives that have been built for lending, for decentralized trading. When you apply them to these STOs, there are regulatory requirements around the trading of these instruments, which mean that you can't necessarily just roll out your usual DeFi products to do it. It needs a little more sophistication, but it's still nonetheless possible to do it. And I think that's where there are a lot of opportunities that remain in the DeFi space.
So I will quote, I don't remember where I heard it, but Tezos is not the blockchain you date, or the blockchain you marry. So the two of you are married. When you started this, what did you envision each of your kind of areas of strength, complementary, kind of attributes to be, and how has it turned out in terms of what you each kind of lean into in terms of strengths in helping to build up this decentralized ecosystem?
Sorry, I'm thinking that we really need to play Kiss, Marry, Kill for blockchains.
Yeah. I'll take
maybe Kathleen, you can describe Arthur from the beginning and Arthur, maybe you can describe Kathleen.
We did an interview where we had to like describe each other's strengths, and it was like the worst version of the newlywed game. But I think we have very natural we have very complementary personalities. We're both very intense, and we don't suffer fools. So I think we have a good orientation and kind of a no bullshit approach when sort of dealing with people. I think Arthur is a fantastic engineer. He's really an engineer's engineer, and he cares a lot about the technical fundamentals of any project, and he's extremely rigorous and thinks from first principles. I think I'm a bit more pragmatic in my approach to problem solving. And I think, that the one sort of lends itself to the other getting to point B a little bit faster. So I think we make a good team.
I agree. I don't have anything to add.
Good answer, Arthur.
Yeah, but it's funny because like people always ask like, oh, you and your husband are co-founders. Oh, did you meet through work? And I'm like, oh dear, this is the least romantic part of our entire life. This is I think people have this idea that like, Arthur's just like, kissing my ass and I'm just kissing his back. It's like, if anything, the forum where we call each other's bullshit out the most. And it's really hard to I get away with dancing around things because we're just so direct with one another.
I would love to hear your views on the metaverse and also specifically on AI, Arthur, because I know that we had mentioned that we advise ARK Invest, and Cathie Wood has always had this view that AI and blockchain are on this ultimate path to convergence. And we haven't really seen a lot of it yet, but you've talked a little bit about generative art. I know that you have this strong, understanding and interest in AI. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm quite interested in both. I think they're so different, and if anything, they are almost on opposite end of the spectrum in terms of like what they enable. The old quote floating around that AI is communist technology, blockchain is libertarian technology. I have tried to find areas of overlap between artificial intelligence and blockchains. I don't think there's that many. Obviously, AI art on blockchains make some sense, and within that, I also think if we want to analyze the security of blockchain projects, reinforcement learning can be a useful tool for doing that. But aside from that, the point of a blockchain is to work with very, very predictable rules, very hard rules, simple rules that are predictable, easy to understand, but that can work really efficiently at scale. Whereas a lot of the AI development today is around systems which are actually going to be harder to predict, which are fuzzier, which deal with underdefined or poorly defined problems. They don't really meet. You wouldn't want your core protocol to be running an AI component. And in the same way as the other applications that have been proposed, like data marketplaces, I don't think make a lot of sense. I worked in finance where you buy data a lot of the time, right? You buy historical tick data, which is in theory public, but you'll see, people. It takes a lot of actually talent and efforts to make it clean, to make sure it's not missing, it's well organized, and you pay for that. And the way they enforce that people pay for it is that these are large organizations paying for it, and if it leaks, they'll know and they'll go after you. But if you try to do this in a peer-to-peer fashion, the idea somehow that people are, the idea that you're going to have a piece of data, you're going to contribute to it, and you're going to get paid for it by some large data collection, I don't buy. I don't think that's going to be a big thing. So that's my general thinking. I don't see conversions. In terms of AI, I think that there's an extremely fast pace of progress over the past few years, and it keeps accelerating. I think it's largely underestimated still as a technology, because it has to cross some threshold, right? And so people look at it and say, oh, it's not that transformative. It's not that transformative. And then as soon as it crosses the threshold, all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, it's too transformative. And we've seen a lot of promises, like self-driving cars. They're here technically in a few cities, but they have yet to revolutionize everything. But the pace of progress is really quick, and honestly scary, because it's not even clear that the outcome at the end of the day is going to be one that's beneficial for humanity. We could also be headed for disasters, to be honest.
Well, I guess that does seem a little bit like the crypto space right now, but that might be the only point of comparison. But it's worth noting that Arthur indeed worked at Waymo for quite some time before jumping onto Tezos. So that's that he knows of what he speaks, which is a comfort.
Yeah. How do you think in let's say 3 years time people will describe Tezos? Do you think that it will be around one specific use case? Will it be a generalized blockchain toolkit? How do you think it will be described by the community?
I think that the ecosystem is becoming more popular for its cultural footholds, and I think that a lot of folks in the ecosystem are making really smart moves to make sure that that lead is maintained in some form or another. I think it's hopefully going to be easier and easier to use and participate in, so that it'll be a bit more like the digital polity that is described in documents from 2018, 19, before like a lot of cryptocurrencies became more popular.
Okay, Arthur, last word to you before we wrap.
I think it will be described as in hindsight unavoidable.
Inevitable. I love it.
Yeah.
Did you say inevitable or unavoidable?
I said unavoidable, but I probably meant inevitable.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for coming. This has been a real treat to have you both here, and thank you, Evan, my co-host. And that's a wrap for another episode of Culture Meets Crypto.
Thanks, Angie.
Thank you,
Evan. I was really looking forward to this discussion because Arthur and Kathleen are first and foremost good friends and good people, and they've dominated the digital fine art scene. It really caught my eye when I saw that article that I mentioned on Art Basel calling out Tezos as the only significant crypto presence. But from this discussion, a really important insight was that neither the Brightmans nor the foundation had to really sell these well-known artists like Maria Abramovich and others to join the platform. The artists are really talking to each other and coming to Tezos as a safe place. The energy efficiency point that many of these artists make surprises a lot of people in crypto, especially now that there are more blockchains like that are on proof of stake. But from our research, artists really care, which is one of the reasons we always talk about the Polkadot network as well. So, the range in artists was really kind of a big surprise to me.
Yeah, definitely. Sort of on that topic, I think one of the key points we discussed was actually around Hickenunk, which ended up being this sort of ultimate decentralization test of Tezos. So when the Hickenunk owner, the website owner attempted to pull the plug on the website's front end, immediately within like a few hours, 20 more websites popped up in its place. And Arthur even said that it was the website owner's right to do what he wanted with the site. But thanks to open source contracts and code and the fact that all the NFTs are stored on chain, other people were able to step in and maintain it.
I really liked that, and also the conversation we had about William Enterkin's 3 phases of NFT adoption. So for those who don't know, William Enterkin is the lead author of the ERC 721 standard, and we had him on another show. And I thought that was just an interesting discussion.
Yeah, Arthur and Kathleen both pointed out that this first phase that we saw, the speculation phase, there hasn't really been a strong desire for decentralization from the mass public because they haven't really needed it. So Hickenunk, though it's kind of a small example of only a few thousand artists, was sort of proof on a small scale that decentralization is going to be super important and people will want it as we move forward.
Yeah. And also for the first time, I want to point out that we recorded some podcast bonus material. It's a discussion with Kathleen about a first of its kind Tezos permanent art collection. It is all digital and curated by well-known British photographer Misan Harriman, who, rumor has it, is the official photographer for the royal family. So we both, and all of us at Signum, hope you enjoyed the show, and we hope you will join us next week. Thank you, Evan.
Thanks.
I met Misan through a good friend of mine in London. I gave a talk at Central St. Martin's about the future of fashion and Web3, which
amazing
is a separate issue. And I met Misan, and he's kind of, if you ever listen to an interview with him, he's just really a magnetic character. He's famous because he's a photographer. He's a portrait photographer, and he was also the first Black man to shoot the cover of Vogue in Britain. That was last September. And if you know anything about fashion, the September issue is the big cheese of the season. So Misan is like one of the easiest people to talk to. And he sort of like mentions in passing while we're at a dinner with my friend Andrea that he likes Tezos. And I'm okay, cool. Like, I really appreciate that. That's very kind of you to say. And then he whips out his phone and he's got like thousands of NFTs just like loaded up on there. I'm like, wow, you really like art, huh? And he's like going through all the different things about his collection. And what I like about the NFT space is you meet people and they treat collecting as an expression for themselves. And Nissan's whole like ethos is about including people who might not otherwise be recognized. And so I thought that was a really beautiful gesture. And like, you know, just based on what he showed me the first time we met, you know, that this guy's walking the walk. He wasn't doing this with any fanfare. He really has an eye for talent, and he's obviously a very established photographer in his own right. So he's clearly got an eye for beauty and sort of a wide range of eclectic tastes. So we immediately got along, and he had told me that a number of different, companies in the ecosystem, the NFT ecosystem, had solicited him for this idea of a permanent collection. I thought that was just a real classy move. And so the Tezos Foundation, you know, in effect, scooped him on that front. And so he's doing that with the, you know, sort of focus on Tezos-based artists, which I think is quite nice because they do tend to be from underrepresented groups in emerging markets. Which I think if you're thinking about how to promote this, you don't just want to, like, Rafiq Adnol is obviously a very impressive artist and a really wonderful man, but like he's got, you know, all the fanfare that you could ask for as a digital artist. He's everywhere, literally across the world. What you really want is to highlight the people who might not otherwise be recognized, and that's what the permanent collection really allows Nissan to do. Is like, if there's a fixed budget, he gets to kind of peruse the web and he highlights these people, and he's sent us a number of really beautiful videos. They're all like on his Twitter feed of people who really, like, their lives are touched by this. And in some ways it's kind of a way to jumpstart their career, not the, you know, different way than like the Serpentine, like pavilion is a way to like kickstart some people's careers. So it's a great gesture, and it harkens back to some of the best parts of the art market, which is otherwise kind of like a pretty dastardly place.